Hello and welcome. I'm Valerie Paley, Senior Vice President and Sue Ann Weinberg Director of the Patricia D. Klingenstein Library at the New York Historical Society. I would like to begin by thanking Louise Mirror, our President and CEO, Agnes Sue Tang, Chair of the Board of Trustees, and Pam Schaffler, our Chair Emerita, and all of our trustees, in particular, the champions of our library, Patricia D. Klingenstein, Sue Ann Weinberg, and Sydney Lapidus. We also acknowledge the generosity of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation, Helen and Robert Appel, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, along with our Chairman's Council, our members, and our many other donors. None of the work of New York Historical is possible without your continued and committed support. The Patricia D. Klingenstein Library at New York Historical is one of the oldest, most distinguished research libraries in the United States. It holds millions of books, newspapers, maps, manuscripts, prints, photographs, and architectural collections. It is a vital center of research into the history of New York and the nation. Key to that research is the presence of a yearly rotation of scholarly fellows, both in residence and in a short-term capacity. Our fellows are engaged in advancing knowledge as they mine New York Historical's collections for new ways of interpreting the American past. We are most fortunate to have them in our midst. Today's program will give you just a taste of the quality of the work that's being done. World Metropolis, the past and future of New York, will last approximately 45 minutes, including 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end, which you can submit via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen at any point during the presentation. The chat function has been disabled, so please do make sure to use the Q&A. After the presentation, we will get to as many questions as time allows. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Kenneth T. Jackson is the Jacques Barzun Professor Emeritus of History at Columbia University. He is an urban, social, and cultural historian who has made significant contributions to the understanding of the history of New York City and of American suburbanization. He has been a leader of several national professional historical organizations, along with the New York Historical Society, where, by an interesting and happy twist of fate, he is currently Senior Distinguished Fellow, working under the supervision of a former student. Me, a frequent media talking head, Professor Jackson is the editor-in-chief of the 2 million word Encyclopedia of New York City, for which he is now probably best known. He is joined in conversation by David Dunbar, Ken's co-author of the award-winning Empire City, New York Through the Centuries, published by Columbia University Press. Dunbar is the co-founder of City Term at the Master's School, an experience-based interdisciplinary semester program that immerses high school students from around the country in an exploration of the history and culture of New York City. He has spent over 40 years teaching in schools in New England, New Mexico, and New York. Presently, he is the principal collaborator with the DKDK project for teachers interested in applying experience-based learning principles to their own classrooms and schools, and was recently recognized in the Best Teachers Institute, a research and education organization of college professors committed to deep learning. Welcome, Ken and David.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you here, and we have a lot to talk about, but since this is a fellows talk, let's first hear from our fellow, Ken Jackson. Quick overview of the project you're working on at the Patricia D. Klingenstein Library.
Well, I'm happy. I've been working on New York all my life, but my current project focuses on the city since 1945, so 45 to 2020, let's say. In 1945, the city emerges from World War II, really is the dominant city in the world. London had had that role for centuries before, not World War I. Maybe they shared it for a period of time between World War I and II. But as a result of World War II, London and Paris were both impoverished, not enough money and families to heat their homes or buy groceries. Similarly, or even worse, Berlin and Moscow and Warsaw and Tokyo, other rival cities, had been destroyed. So that at the end of World War II, New York stood astride the financial world. It was the dominant center of world finance, but also culturally in a new way, whereas Europeans had slightly looked down on American institutions before the war. After World War II, suddenly the metropolitan Museum of Art, the Metropolitan Opera, the New York Philharmonic, and the leaders of those kind of things like Leonard Bernstein and George Balanchine were world class. And so New York had the money. So suddenly New York was astride the world. And this was right after World War II. The decline of the city begins, I think, as early as the 1950s. It had been as late as 1954, the leading industrial city in the world and the busiest harbor in the world. And within a few years after the middle of the 1950s, those two strong supports of its economy were kicked out. The industry essentially all left. It's mostly gone now. They still make a few bagels here and things like this, but most everything else, especially the women's clothes, which used to all be made here somewhere else. And then the harbor, mostly done in by the container ships, the great big boxes, the back end of a tractor trailer truck, which is where somebody loads 20,000 pairs of socks outside of a Chinese city, puts them in there and seals it, sends it to Shanghai, where it's stacked as 10,000 other containers, and it's brought to Port of Long Beach, Los Angeles, or maybe to Port Newark, where it's put on the back end of another truck. It doesn't take hundreds of longshoremen anymore. Anyway, they're gone. So in a sense, the story that I'm trying to follow is what happens to New York. It declines, of course, in population, white flight, corporate exodus, all these different kind of things happen, rising crime. The city is in bankruptcy in the 1970s, or not technically, but it essentially is. And then somehow, for some reason, it's not clear, that's what I'm going to try to work on, the city turns around, unlike a Detroit, unlike a Buffalo, unlike a St. Louis or Cincinnati or many other cities. New York comes back and comes back barreling back, so that even the World Trade Center disaster of 2001 does really not knock it off the tracks. And now the question, of course, is whether a worldwide pandemic, which is a different sort of challenge, can make the city reassess, or maybe make the world reassess New York, so that we have to ask the question of what's the future of New York City?
I'm just curious, why does it come barreling back? To what do you attribute that?
Well, I wish I could give you a short answer or one, but I think there are many things. I think sometimes the basic elements of New York that have been here, density, where a lot of people in one place, diversity, it's always been the most diverse of American cities. When we can talk about why is that too, but nevertheless, that's the density, diversity, toleration. Not that New Yorkers all loved each other, but they got along. In other words, they said, do your business, I'll do mine, we'll get along. So New York has been more of a place of this kind of thing. And as I think the history also tells us something, that as David Dunbar has argued, that New Yorkers have been adaptable in the past. It's not that change is not forced on New York, but somehow New York has responded with energy and imagination to adapt to every new challenge that comes along. And then it's had, I want to say, little decent or a little better than decent leadership. New York has not had any mayor that's gone to prison since the 1920s or 30s.
That's a really good bar.
I know that, but when you consider the 3 mayors of Newark went to prison, and the mayor of Bridgeport had hookers in his office, and it's not always been a high bar here, but you can like or dislike the New York leaders, but they've mostly been generally honest, because there's a bright light on them at all times. And the crime situation, even though New York has a reputation for is a dangerous, scary place, the truth is the matter, even in its worst years, which would be 1980s and early 90s, New York was never the crime capital. And since the precipitous decline of crime in the last 30 years, New York has actually become one of the safest cities in the world. And, I'm from Memphis. I mean, Memphis has almost as many homicides every year as New York, and it's 1/12 as large. Chicago is 1/3 as big as New York. It's got many more homicides. You know, LA has half as, you know, it's half the size of New York and has more homicides. So this, you know, New York gets a bad rap for danger.
I just want to ask you one more thing before we move on, and that is, you know, for those of us who are part of the Ken Jackson diaspora, and there are many among us, both online right now as well as in the world, and it's very nice to be part of a family of kindred spirits. So we are indebted to you and your great teaching, Ken. But we've been hearing you argue about the toleration, diversity, density. I've heard that before in almost every aspect of New York history, the way you teach it. So it's like it's baked into its DNA. Are you arguing that this is what really will help the city to survive into the next era, whatever that might be?
You know, Valerie, I mean, the obvious answer is I do not know. But who can predict the future? I mean, who could have predicted that an ordinary World War I soldier, Adolf Hitler, would turn his country into this behemoth and start a world war that would cost 57 million lives, or that people would fly two airliners in the World Trade Center and make them both collapse, or that currently we see this pandemic, which would make so many changes in the world's happen. So the world circumstances. So I don't really know, but I do believe that we can look at history to learn from it. And I do believe that, for example, Tokyo, which is now the world's largest city, and in some ways its most exciting, also a culinary capital. I do not believe that a city that is as homogenous as Tokyo can ever become the capital of the world. It's all 99% Japanese, whereas New York and London are both very diverse, where the world can have a second home. And I think that's going to be necessary in the 21st century.
Terrific. Just pick up on something that Ken said about adaptability, David, and we often spoke as colleagues and just as friends about that and about New York and what makes New York, New York. Do you want to riff on that for a little bit for us?
Yeah. Let me pick up on a couple things Ken said, and I'll come back to the adaptability part in a bit. I think we can learn from history. I think the idea of figuring out what the essential characteristics of New York are. I'm a relative newcomer, so this is about 25 years for me now. But I can remember for the first 20 years I was teaching American history, United States history, and even writing part of a textbook. And one of the things when I came to New York, I suddenly had an awakening. The awakening was this. US history textbooks are set up as basically Yankees versus Cavaliers. It's John Winthrop versus Thomas Jefferson. It's the Puritans and the slave owners. And New York is simply forgotten for the most part. There are reasons for this. I realized that on the one hand, you have great American myths, the city upon a hill, you know, which Reagan references over and over again, which Winthrop talks about. And then you have the agrarian utopia of Thomas Jefferson. But what holds those two things together, as different as they are, is an intolerance. That one of the reasons New York is exactly what Ken said, is because of difference. And it took me a long time to figure out the reason those textbooks are written that way is essentially teleological. That the whole textbook moves towards the Civil War. That's why you set it up that way. But the reason you set it up is that so that you don't realize that Jefferson obviously believed that blacks and whites could not live together. John Winthrop banished all the Quakers that he didn't hang to that cesspool, Rhode Island. And in his diary writes about how Anne Hutchinson, our beloved Parkway, Anne Hutchinson, death at the hands of Indians in New York was God's judgment on the American Jezebel. These are not people who have any tolerance of difference whatsoever. New York City, on the other hand, and Ken could go on about this for a while, it's Dutch, and that matters. That didn't make it into those textbooks. So for me, it was a rewriting of history that you had in New York. It was founded for economic reasons. It was not religious. It was not political. The Flushing Remonstrance, John Peter Zenger. By 1640, there are like 18 languages being spoken. It's all about difference. So I would start with that. The other thing is what Ken and I argued at Empire City, which is if one D is difference, the other D is dynamism. And what we were interested in that, which I think is still true, is why is New York City so dynamic? Like, why is that true? And I think the reason for that is that unlike the suburbs and unlike most other cities, and Ken can talk about this at length, that there are reasons for New York has certain tensions that it holds and it does not resolve them. And the suburbs resolve them and other cities resolve them. A few of them are public and private. People are always stunned by the streets of New York, what goes on. When my students came from other parts of the country and would come here, they just couldn't believe what they heard on the streets. We're just used to it. Commerce and culture, always a tension that gets set up. Identity and assimilation, and then creation and destruction. All of those involve toleration, but they also involve negotiation. When I walk out of this apartment and I go onto the street every day, no matter where, even when I was out today, you are negotiating. You're negotiating race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, gender, nationality, space, time, traffic. You're negotiating nonstop. If you don't like that, you're not going to like New York City. So for me, the characteristics are the difference and the dynamism, which is partly from those tensions. Then we can talk about what that means for the future. I think I have some thoughts about that too, but hopefully that helps.
So Ken, what do you think makes New York, New York? And I know you always compare it to other cities, and insofar as we're talking about how New York transitions from a world city to the world city to whatever lay beyond World War II and its ascension. What do you think constitutes New York's vital characteristics?
Well, first of all, it's skyscrapers. I know that there are many cities around the world that have tall buildings now, from South America, especially in Asia, not so much in Europe. But in New York, it's a little bit different. If you go to Tokyo, for example, where there's so many tall buildings, people don't live in the tall buildings. Those are offices. They want to live closer to the ground, maybe because of earthquakes. In London, they have, of course, tall buildings, but the tall buildings are separated from where the people live, so the shopping is separate. In New York, it's together. What I find interesting about New York is around Christmas, or in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, there's gridlock on the streets in New York. I mean, walking. They have to have policemen with barricades so that you can only cross in certain ways. The crowds are so thick. And I've often thought that mothers bring their granddaughters to New York to remind themselves and teach their granddaughters what Detroit used to be like when Hudson's was open, or G. Fox, or in Atlanta Riches, or in Memphis Goldsmiths, or in Chicago Marshall Fields, back when those department stores defined the city. In New York, in some ways, they still do. So that New York is while it's a city that represents modernism, with all the tall buildings, it also still represents the past. A person can come back to New York today who's been asleep for 75 years, and the city is the same. I mean, subway stops are the same, bus routes are the same. I mean, yeah, there are a lot more tall buildings, and they're on the edges where they used to be in the middle, but the bones of the city are in the same place. And so
You're talking about the built environment as opposed to the human environment. Is that the same?
Well, clearly, New York has 450 neighborhoods, and each one of them has its own characteristics. Interestingly enough, there's no such thing as a New York City neighborhood. There's no place like Greenwich Village. It doesn't exist legally. But we know, New York knows when you live in Flushing, or whether you live in Little Italy in the Bronx or somewhere else. Neighborhoods exist in New York, and it makes the city navigatable to the people who live here. We don't live in a city that has 8.8 million people. We live in the city, which is our neighborhood, in our bus stop or our subway stop or our delicatessen, where they know whether we want milk or not in our coffee. The same people know it. So we break it down so we can understand it. So what New York has done, it's a worldwide experiment. Can all the people in the world live in this tiny little space, not cut each other's throats? because look what's happening in Ukraine, obviously, but in Kosovo and what used to be Yugoslavia or all these other places where people have contests and arguments that have been going on for centuries. What's amazing about New York is that the Jews and the Muslims don't, this is a giant city for both of them. Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, they're together. And they Central Parkway in Brooklyn divides the Lubavitchers from the Crown Heights Black neighborhoods. The amazing thing is that people don't fight. The people from Yugoslavia, the Croatians and all the other people over there who cut each other's throats, they all live together in New York. They don't fight. You find this over and over again. Somehow when people get to New York, they say, you know, we're here for another reason. We're not here to keep the fights going from the old world. Let's do a new thing. So it's the ability to somehow control your behavior. So we don't all have to love each other, but we have to tolerate each other. So New York has always been a city that was everybody's second home. So if you're gay, if you're anyway, you love to play chess 24 hours a day, you know, and every other part of the United States should be considered completely weird. In New York City, there are dozens of people. Well, that's exactly what they want to do every day, all day. Fine, we don't care. And I think that's what New York does. It's so big and so dense that we can give a welcome to everybody. We can't talk to everybody. We can't say hi to everybody we pass on the street. That would be impossible. We'd be a spinning top if we tried that. But we can have a spot in the city or many spots where people can feel comfortable and feel valued as human beings.
I think Ken, you sounded just like E.B. White's Here is New York. And for people who want to go back to listen to that, so much of what it is. And my feeling has always been when I came here, and I'd never been here until 25 years ago, is you sort of feel like New York is to America what America is to the world. And that is the great multicultural experiment. Like, is this going to work? Are you going to have all these people from all these places who are here? And a large part of what Ken's talking about in terms of why people are doing is because it's not a religious utopia. It's not an agrarian utopia, much as Jefferson hated cities. It's here for those people are interacting economically primarily. And all of those negotiations are economic negotiations. And that's part of why, this would get us into the other part of the question, is that if you're talking about a capacity for change and a capacity for transformation, that's partly comes out from negotiation. If you can't negotiate with your own past, then you're not going to transform. You're not going to change.
That's very much sort of part of your own argument about why New York will survive in a way, and what makes New York, that this is your version of New York exceptionalism. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because it has an abstract quality, which when you get it is quite...
Really? Me, Valerie, an abstract quality? Imagine.
Ken and I are always like, what? The audience understands what you're saying.
Ken can feel. See, Ken looks at that in terms of how the historical events and how they go. The way I look at it, but the same question is why? Why do we think New York is going to stay as the world metropolis? And I think there's a lot of good historical causal reasons. I'm interested. One of the things I'm interested in is the whole concept of intelligence. Like, what is intelligence? And specifically, let me start with this. 100 years ago or so, Charles Spearman advocated what he called a general intelligence. Everybody knows it because it's the IQ, it's the SATs, it's the GREs. It's a heavily analytic. It's the kind of intelligence that fosters the whole notion of that the brain is like a computer, which I think there's some problems with, but and therefore it's quite good at solving technical problems. Technical problems are ones that things that can be solved with the knowledge of experts of what we have now. What I would argue is the tensions, the difference and the dynamism of New York are part of what some cognitive psychologists are starting to call now an adaptive intelligence. And I think it is the intelligence of the future. It is what's going to happen. The biggest example that we have right now is how bad are we at climate change? We are looking at it like it's a technical problem and it's an adaptation problem. It's Darwinian. Like, are we as a species going to survive? So this adaptive intelligence is what I think is baked into New York. It establishes, it's about sort of changing oneself to fit the environment and changing the environment to fit oneself. So it's a dialogic relationship, but it's not technical, it's collective. It's how the city moves itself, so that instead of like a computer, it's more like it's a jazz orchestra. So intelligence is more like an orchestra than it is like a computer. And then the hardest problems that we're going to face are adaptive problems in the future. They're not technical problems. They're technical and adaptive. It's a both and. An adaptive intelligence always looks at a problem as a both and problem, not an either or problem. And then there's a couple of reasons for that, I guess, well, let me give you two examples of what I think is true about an adaptive intelligence. One is that it encourages nuance and ambiguity, and it eschews dichotomy. In other words, that when you start looking at things as an either or problem, then adaptation is not what you're talking about. You're trying to solve a problem. The other thing is that this goes back to Robert Penn Warren talking with Bill Moyers, I remember in 1976 at the bicentennial. And he says, the capacity for self-criticism in America is what he loves about America. I think the capacity for self-criticism is what is one of the characteristics of an adaptive intelligence, along with that non-dichotomous sense of both and nuance. And New York—
And you believe that New York is totally emblematic of what you just described?
This is where I'll lead into what Ken's saying. I'll just give one example. So I just spent 2 weeks with a bunch of students from the Hewitt School down exploring Union Square. Let's just take Union Square alone in terms of self-criticism. Labor Day, 1882, Emma Goldman, Margaret Sanger and the birth control, and the first suffrage parade is 1910. The IWW organizing, the Communist Party headquarters, Sacco and Vanzetti, and then Black Lives Matter. That's just one little place in New York. Now, it's not a little place, but I mean, and it has a capacity for that self-criticism that I think is indicative of an adaptive intelligence.
And I think David raises an interesting question, which I think probably he's right about, is that a city, well, individuals have personalities. His argument is that there's a personality to New York. In other words, yes, it's got X millions number of people living here, this ethnicity, but that somehow over time they develop a kind of the city itself can be spoken of as something that changes and thinks and adapts or doesn't adapt, and that New York is more vital, more able to change, that if we look at its past and the way it's overcome. By the way, this is not the first time New York has been challenged. I mean, COVID. But that how is it that it's always overcome? It always works out a new way of dealing with things. And that the argument is that a city is a thing. A city can be talked about as having a personality. I'm not sure that's a done deal or not. David does a good job of defending it. But I think a lot of people would say New York is different. It's just different. If you're here and you've lived here for a while, doesn't matter where you were born, but you are responsible for where you live. And a lot of people respond to New York and its independent style, its live and let live traditions.
I think it's going back to the individual. It's what Carl Rogers said, right? The curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, just as I am, then I can change. I think New York has a capacity to accept itself just as it is. And I don't know whether does it have a greater ability than other cities or other places? I don't know, but I think it does have that. and that's the Union Square example. But as you're saying, that's been happening all through the city in all kinds of different ways.
Let's talk about something that's just we've been circling around, but that's quite obvious to our day-to-day existence at the moment, and that is COVID and the pandemic. And assuming, as we do as New York exceptionalists, that New York is the world city, not just a world city, will this do what previous crises could not do to New York, which is shake its end or even end its primacy? I wonder what you're arguing in your new book, Ken, or your new work.
Well, I want to say again, I cannot see the future any way that any better than other people can. I would say that futurists have often not been very good at it themselves. They were the one who predicted, in the 1970s and 80s, that everybody would head to the suburbs because of computers. Turns out the techies are the ones that are concentrating in Silicon Valley and Research Triangle Park and Austin and Lower Manhattan, which now turns out to be the second largest concentration of techies in the country. So we've got to be careful about it. But I do think that history does teach us something. If you've dealt with crises in the past, and this is, of course, not the first health emergency New York has faced, and the 19th century, cholera was the classic epidemic disease. It was horrible. I mean, when it came in the 1830s and late 1840s and then early 1860s, it devastated cities. It caused many more deaths and even with the city much smaller. And the city developed, at first they blamed it on the person. If you're getting cholera, it's because you're living a dissolute, drunken life, which is what, since the Irish were getting it, obviously the Irish were the cause. Well, as we know now, is because they lived in poverty-stricken circumstances and polluted water and all sorts of other things. Gradually, over a few years, they began to blame it on the city itself. And you can actually clean up the city and get rid of those piles of garbage and refuse and clean up and burn the materials of the deceased. By 1866, New York had a powerful Metropolitan Board of Health. It still has one of the best public health departments in the world. And it was the first city to really experience COVID full blast into the city. And it was hit. I don't want to belittle COVID as an important issue in the city's history. COVID is big, but I think the city's response to it has been, let's follow the science. Let's do what has to be done. Let's get it done. I think the city has done that. We could talk about other issues, clean water, for example, or all sorts of things.
Did New York face any doubts about its future after the 1918 flu pandemic? Just as a point of comparison.
I think what would be surprising if you read the newspapers in 1919 is how little they've got to say about the epidemic. It's not, they're not really worried about the epidemic.
Yeah.
People are dying. Well, okay, what else is new? That's not to belittle. I don't mean to trivialize an epidemic that took 50 million lives.
No, but it is astounding when you do read the papers of the day and you see photographs of people standing cheek by jowl. It is interesting. Yeah. So what does the past suggest to us about the city's current challenges and how that'll impact the future? I'm asking you to be a prognosticator again, but I guess I'm asking you as a New Yorker and as a historian, are you optimistic?
Well, first of all, short answer, I am optimistic, but the second answer is that I still love to see examples in the past. For example, you mentioned the New York Historical Society's wonderful library and its manuscript division. I have been pouring through the Bernard Goetz papers. He was the subway vigilante in 1980. So now we're thinking about there's a subway crime wave. Well, there was a real feeling there. You could look at the transcripts where it was a case in which a white man, a young white man, carrying a loaded gun. So he was actually convicted of that. And 4 young men who happened to all be of color surround him and ask for $5. And he felt threatened. He wound up, it's a long story, and the number of boxes in the Historical Society runs, fills up big tables. He winds up shooting all four of them and paralyzing them one for life. And it really does show the splits in society that we still have with us today. People said, this man obviously overreacted. These young boys did not show him a weapon, did not threaten him. He clearly felt threatened, but so many of the people in the country felt that he spoke for them when he fired at them. He said, you surround me and I'll shoot you. He said the only reason he stopped shooting was he ran out of bullets. Well, there was a movie, Death Wish, and it kept on being made. Death Wish 2, Death Wish 3, Death Wish 4, about vigilantes. You know, somebody's got to stop this senseless violence. But it's like it's like I was reading it that happened yesterday.
I'm so surprised that we have that archive. Explain to me what that collection is. That's kind of wonderful that there it is in New York Historical. We think of it as a, you know, rich in 18th and 19th century and perhaps early 20th, but this is very much of the more recent past.
The judge, the presiding judge.
How could he even, I should know this, why it wound up in our collection, but it is kind of wonderful that it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
It really it has all the jury selection and all the different kinds of stuff verbatim, and it's quite something. But I think it does remind us that the New York that we see in 2022 is not so different from that of 1922. The issues in many cases are the same. The economic issues, the social issue, the concern for our children, it's the same.
Back to the collections of the New York Historical Society, because I do want to shout out to our wonderful library staff who do work so diligently to bring out the resources for our fellows and our scholars and researchers. But I know you were also working in the Wall Street Project, the video archive that we've collected. How is that working out for you?
You asked me earlier how New York overcame, the threats of bankruptcy in the 1970s, of white flight, of corporate exodus, of crime, of loss of industry, all these different kind of things. Well, one of the things it did was the reemergence of Wall Street, the growth of the financial services industry, which you could not have predicted probably in 1960 or 1970. And yet these are a series of interviews with New York senior executives, hour long, a little longer, about their experience being live in positions of responsibility in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and the decisions that were being made. And they were there at the beginning. The whole idea of credit default swaps, of consulting. Was there a consulting industry in 1950? Not much, but it develops. How does Wall Street develop? And these are also personal in the sense, what is it about you personally that adjusted to it? I find them riveting, and I haven't looked at them all, but they're right there to be used in the New York Historical Society Library.
We do have, do you want to say something, David?
Yeah, only what you were saying before. I think the hard thing is trying to figure out whether COVID's like anything else, or whether it's sui generis as such. It's its own thing. I will say, and I'm a James Baldwin person. So, as Baldwin said, it's like not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And I think New York faced COVID. It was not surprising to me that it did. It got hit hard and hardest, fast. But it faced it. You had a feeling that there was that we were a group of people, that there was a collective intelligence that was adapting to what it was doing. I don't know enough about other places in the country. I see news reports that, are maybe not as that it wasn't faced as directly on in other places. But I think Baldwin was right that's definitely true. The other thing I would say is that my friend Chris is in the chat here in the Q&A, and I just want to, because Ken, he's talking about the response to the 70s to the financial crisis. One of the things he brings up, which I think is a really great point, which you should talk to, is about the relationship of the suburbs to New York, which is your thing, and also in relationship to mass transit. Like, how does that play into the whole fabric of New York? I mean, we're talking about the city, but as you know, mass transit makes a huge difference in terms of recovery.
Well, clearly, how you get to work or how you get around. The fact that we do share that, whether you're rich or poor. I remember when I was president of the New York Historical Society, and well, the library is named for Patricia Klingenstein, who rides the subway and the bus. And Richard Gilder would meet me at the Atomic Cafe, and I would say proudly, I rode the subway to get here. And say, how did I get here? In other words, that people who have resources share these kinds of things. In New York, that's important. It's not for poor people. It's for people. And that's one of the ways that New York negotiates, as you would say, negotiates its past, that we're all in this together. There's a way in which New Yorkers share space. When I lived in Los Angeles, and the candidates for public office would stand at street corners waving at the cars. But in New York, they stand at the subway stops and the bus stops because they're actual people to say hello to. You know, you can't avoid the homeless in New York. In much of America, you can. You get in your car, you open your garage door, you drive to your suburban office park, you drive them to the mall, you will go see your dentist, you come back home, go to the grocery store. You've never seen people. You've never seen poor people. In New York, you cannot avoid the problems of the world. They're here in front of your face. And what's wonderful about New York is how it's the home of more billionaires than any other city. And that's interesting because a billionaire can obviously live wherever he or her wants to live. That they choose to live in the city. And I mean, a lot of billionaires have places in the city. I mean, actually live here. And that the poorest people want to walk through Mexico, somehow hike and get a ride to New York City. The poorest people on the planet feel like New York City will give them an opportunity. We don't care what their racial history or their religious history or anything else is. We care that they want to work hard and that they're willing to walk thousands of miles to do it. I mean, that shows you something. That is the quality of New York. New Yorkers choose to be here.
That's true, except for those of us born here who, well, we choose to remain here though. But I think that we could debate whether billionaires are good for New York or not. But I'm going to go to the questions now. And it's a good segue actually with the mass transit and such. And the question is, can you discuss the impact of work from home, particularly those who commuted to the city, and the vacant storefronts impact on the city? Obviously in the pandemic, in the last couple of years, is this time different to any revival?
Well, clearly we've all seen the empty storefronts, even on Madison Avenue or on 42nd Street, really major commercial strips. So there has been a challenge to retail sales and also to restaurants. I mean, New York is built around walking traffic, but it's a pedestrian city. And that's a challenge. I think, this is an editorial, but that we're social animals. We need each other. Toddlers are attracted to other toddlers. Young boys and girls want to play with people like themselves. The people we all want to attract now are the 20-somethings. It used to be thought that people follow the jobs. Now it seems like the jobs are following the people. So that many of the tech companies, the Amazons, the Alphabets, the Googles, are attracted to New York because that's where talent is. And what is interesting is that those people are not attracted to grass. They're attracted by human beings to sit in an outdoor restaurant and watch the world go by, potential romantic partners or whatever. That's going to stay there. There will be people. Look, it's easy to stay home, and it's more convenient than to go to work. I would not be surprised to see a 4-day work week become much more common in the future. You work another hour or two at work. That's more efficient in terms of transportation and many other ways, and babysitting and who knows what. So there will probably be some permanent change. But I think the research we've seen so far suggests that despite the fact that you think you're more productive at home because you have more time, is not true. That actually the quality and amount of work that you accomplish is greater in an office environment than it is in a residential environment. And that hybrid workspaces aren't quite as good. That's not to say that they don't have advantages for single mothers with young children. There are people, maybe we're not going to go back exactly where we were, but there are reasons why the office skyscraper is an efficient way to, when people invented the telephone, they thought with a telephone, why do you need a skyscraper? We can just talk. Well, it turns out that the telephone makes the skyscraper possible. Valerie, can I meet you for lunch? Can we get a drink together or something? Let's talk about this. So something like, and if with the same way with internet communications, an awful lot of it is about meeting face to face. So I think face-to-face interaction is liable to stay with us and survive the COVID challenge.
We have a question for David. Oh, by the way, you're coughing because you were in a place with grass, so clearly you don't recently, so you have allergies. Clearly you don't like grass either, Ken, right? New York City historian. For David, in what specific ways have you seen the city collectively and individually mourn the losses of COVID? As a fellow city termer, this query comes from, I wonder, how has experiential learning rebuilt itself post-COVID? How have you seen New York practice empathetic availability in supporting students to ensure the greatest chance to make up for all the missed time, development, and experiential learning lost over the past 2 years?
Wow. Obviously my interest in intelligence and the tyranny of Charles Spearman's general intelligence, I'm obviously not. I think that's important for solving technical problems, but this adaptive intelligence seems to be much more important to me. It strikes me with the schools that the people that I talk with, the schools that I work with, what COVID has done is it's exposed a lot of the way schools operate, I guess. And I think it's going to be a very interesting few years. Going back to James Baldwin, are people going to, are they going to face what actually got revealed by COVID in terms of how learning really happens? Are we going to really talk about whether or not school is for learning? Or are we going to talk about that school is for performance and we're teaching people how to perform? Or do we say, you know what, that got revealed by COVID. And now, you know what, we're going to do something about it. And maybe we'll make school a little bit more about learning as well as about performance would be one thing I would say. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I don't know. It's hard. I think it's difficult. To me, it's too early to see what is actually going to happen. I'm a little nervous that everybody's just so, relieved that they just kind of go, well, let's just try and get back to exactly what we were doing as much as possible. And I think that's a mistake, I guess I would say. I have a question for Ken, though. This comes from, I think this is from my friend Mike. It was come through this. So Ken, you came in '68, right? So your first year is the Columbia explosion, right? In terms of that. But you were here for the 1970s punk we're not during the middle of the financial crisis and the downturn, and the Velvet Underground, the New York Dolls, the Talking Heads, the Ramones, all of that sort of stuff. I don't know if that was your scene. We've never talked about this, but do you think that's in terms of an adaptation? What's the relationship of that kind of music and the way it comes out of a financial crisis? I mean, is that part, you think, of the dynamism that happens?
Well, first of all, you're right. I was never a part of that scene.
Oh, okay.
But I would say this, what I find interesting is looking at the past. And I was in New York in some of the darkest days of the city's history.
Right.
You know, in terms of crime, in terms of corruption, in terms of white flight. And yet I didn't realize I was in, it's like people who are in the middle of this transitional thing sometimes are unaware. Well, this is life. I mean, you still go to the grocery store, you still have a ham sandwich. You know, you're just doing normal life takes place every day. And I'm even amazed as I watch the cameras as the tanks roll by and their cars going by. Are they going to the grocery store? Where are these cars going? Driving past Russian tanks. The daily life takes place. Now, maybe it's not so much all the time, but it is true that, and in the midst of high crime, and I think people who are afraid to, just because it's a high crime area doesn't mean that there's like Death Wish would have suggested to you, there's going to be a homicide every time you go outside and you're liable to be in the middle of it. You know, it's not that way. We assume things are much worse than they in fact are. And in fact, as Anne Frank would have said, most people are fundamentally decent and most people just want to get by and get along and not bother you. And I think we learned that in New York's experience and in the way in which New Yorkers adjust to each other. They're much friendlier than they're given credit for being. They're much more, as I get older and more infirm, and I have people trying to give me seats on subways, buses all the time, or can they help me? Here I know where I am, but they act like, can I give you guidance somewhere? People are just coming up. And I think that New Yorkers are much more anxious to help than we've ever given them credit for being.
This actually is a very good moment to ask the question that comes from Michael Michonne, former Manhattan Borough historian and a friend and colleague. And he asks, I'm not so sure I'm interested in New York City's relationship with the suburbs as I am with Manhattan's relationship with the other four boroughs. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've always felt that it's a strength of New York that it has both incredible suburbs. It has incredible suburbs. They're beautiful, they're spacious. I take Los Angeles. I like Los Angeles. But in Los Angeles, you can go 30 miles from the center of the city, and the lots are still small. And the drop off in the density gradient is not very large. In New York, the difference between the middle of Manhattan and the distance to suburbs is extreme. So you have a choice in New York. You can choose your environment. You can choose to be in the greatest city in the world and the most exciting city any place, or you can watch the birds feed. You can do that in Central Park, of course, as well. But you can in a sense, experience nature and grow things and stuff like this. So I think it's a strength of New York that whether you like the cultural activities of the great city or you like the beauty of nature, you can find it in New York. You know, in so many cities, that's not the case. In New York, it's upfront and personal. And I don't think they hurt each other. I think they benefit each other. Choose your poison. We've got great suburbs. We got great urban neighborhoods in the city. Come.
I think that's a wonderful place to end, actually, because unfortunately we've run out of time. And as we discussed when we were planning this program, we knew we could go on for hours, but we are at the hour mark. So I want to thank Ken Jackson and David Dunbar for being with us today. And please do, the rest of you, sign up for our mailing list and follow us at nyhistory.org to get the latest on upcoming fellows talks like this one. Finally, the New York Historical Society is currently open Wednesday through Sunday. You can reserve your timed entry museum tickets on our website. We hope to see you on Central Park West to view the exhibition Black Dolls and our numerous other offerings. Thank you again, and have a great night.